For the past several years, city officials have been giving more attention to the effects of climate change, especially in connection with rising sea levels and rising temperatures. As the risk boundaries expand in the years ahead, there will be more need for design features to help withstand flooding or mitigate the harmful effects of heat islands. These are all reflected in the draft overlay zoning map released by the Boston Planning and Development Agency. To tell us about the draft is the BPDA's Assistant Deputy Director for Climate Change and Environmental Planning, Chris Busch. Thank you very much for being with us,
Yeah,
Chris.
thanks, Chris.
Chris, start with the science that's behind this overlay. What's driving it?
Yeah, well, a lot of this follows from Climate Ready Boston, which is really the citywide strategic master plan, if you will, for climate preparedness in the city. That document frames out the primary climate hazards we're going to be facing, which are sea level rise, coastal storms, precipitation, and heat. Preceding that, there was a very important document developed by the Boston Research Advisory Group. So this group was led by UMass Boston, comprised of a number of different scientists, engineers, modelers from areas of institutions, really digging into the science and data specific to climate change in and around Boston. Through that analysis and evaluation of the data and modeling on sea level rise, we came to understand that there are significant areas of the city that'll be susceptible to future storm events. So a lot of that scientific background is based upon the Research Advisory Group report. With the understanding that science modeling is always being updated as well, so we have to maintain some level of flexibility over time, to update our understanding based upon the changing nature of climate change.
What's also driving this is the whole drift of post-industrial development in many cities, not just Boston, as well as the harbor cleanup, because that's all contributed to a surge of development anywhere that's close to water. So what does that mean about the importance of this overlay?
Yeah, we do see a lot of development in our waterfront neighborhoods, East Boston, South Boston, new projects, even along the downtown waterfront. These are areas that used to be part of the harbor once upon a time. I mean, I think over 5,000 acres of the city is filled or made land, and a lot of these future vulnerable areas relate to that old historic shoreline of Boston. Since Climate Ready came out with this sort of advanced understanding of what we have of vulnerabilities. We've had more substantial sort of requirements and parameters for new developments in these waterfront areas. So we have numbers on sea level rise through 2070, looking for project proponents to ensure that their buildings are flood proofed or elevated above that scale, ensuring things like mechanical systems and whatnot, vulnerable systems are elevated, that those precautions are being taken. But through Climate Ready as well, we've been involved with a number of what we term coastal resilient solution reports. Based upon the most vulnerable waterfront neighborhoods, we've been working with consultant teams, residents, neighborhood stakeholders, getting a better understanding of future flood pathways, the types of design infrastructure we're going to need along our shoreline as well at a broader scale, and ensuring that new infrastructure not only protects but also enhances access to and along the waterfront, also can improve habitat.
You don't have to be a scientist these days to think that anything that passes for waterfront property would be vulnerable. But when I look at the map showing where this overlay would apply, there are some other places in the city where you don't intuitively think that this is close to the water, but there really are vulnerable places, right?
Exactly. And to that point, as I noted, a lot of these areas of historic fill, they're just at a low elevation. So once we have a storm surge or a flood event that gets above a certain elevation, water starts getting into these areas, such as the South End, areas of Rochester, uh, fairly great extents within East Boston and Charlestown. So with the resilient strategies that we're moving forward with, working on these district scale measures along the waterfront, but with our zoning and guidelines ensuring that new projects and retrofits are implementing design implements that can help protect against floodwaters as well.
Well, is one thing that a lot of property owners are increasingly aware of right now is that if they own something that's in a zone that's declared by the federal government to be a flood risk, they're going to be paying more for insurance. But you're also using those zones drawn by the federal government on this overlay. So that means a change in what's allowed. There's a metric that goes with that. So how does this work in the overlay plan?
Yeah, we currently have through our zoning Article 25, which incorporates FEMA's flood insurance rate maps. So that's sort of the flood hazard mapping we currently have in place. Those maps are based upon historic storms of record. They do not incorporate sea level rise. So again, based upon the flood risk mapping we have through Climate Ready, which does look at future storms, future sea level rise. We're really sort of expanding that threshold of coverage to a broader area based upon those future risks. Those FEMA flood maps will still be in place. We have to maintain those as part of the National Flood Insurance Program. Flood insurance is required within the FEMA maps. The overlay and the extents that relate to that 27 extent of inundation, that those are areas that are not required to carry flood insurance, although I know FEMA has preferred insurance programs for folks that do fall outside of those FEMA zones. My understanding is about 25% of flood claims are for areas outside of those zones. But the standards under the NFIP would be maintained as would that Article 25 component. The draft and the new overlay would just expand that area of coverage.
Well, this overlay means that in the future, new buildings or buildings that are being expanded or maybe even renovated, perhaps, they have to have things a certain elevation above ground level and even beyond that, above, predicted sea levels. What does that mean exactly?
Well, through the overlay, what we're working with is developing a design flood elevation, which would establish a first occupiable floor for residential uses or a flood-proof elevation for non-residential uses. And that design flood elevation would comprise of what we term a base flood elevation. So that would be the top of water that you would see with that major flood event, that 1% chance storm, as we term it at around 2070 with the 40 inches of sea level rise. So that's our base flood elevation. And through FEMA, following FEMA, there's always what's termed freeboard or sort of a margin of safety above that. So we are requiring an additional 1 foot for non-residential uses and 2 feet for residential and sort of sensitive uses such as schools or shelters, things of that nature that have a higher sensitivity. So those are the standards that are being set through the overlay. I think importantly would be measuring building height from that design flood elevation. Currently, building height is measured from grade. So if there is a project proponent that in the past has wanted to elevate their site or their first finished floor elevation, they could run into zoning height definitions in certain districts. So in measuring height from that design flood elevation, that allows for that elevated strategy to be deployed.
This plan also brings up resiliency, and I guess that means a number of things. It means you can't have a furnace at ground level, maybe. It might mean you have to think of how people can get out of a building if there's a flood. So how is that going to work?
Yeah, in terms of uses beneath that flood elevation, we're trying to ensure that mechanical systems, so water heaters, electrical utility infrastructure is up and out of harm's way. So trying to get those above that design flood elevation as well. Yeah, access, as you noted, is a very important component where we could have issues with people getting in and out of a building. So we're ensuring that stairs, ramps, things of that nature would not be counted towards gross square foot area for a building. So really trying to maintain FAR with allowances for those types of access infrastructure within or even outside a building to get in and out. And we're going to be reviewing projects through our development review process with urban design staff to look at that nature of engagement between a building and an elevated building with existing sidewalk and street elevations, looking at buffering and screening design implements that can be deployed as well, so people aren't walking along a blank wall.
One other thing that struck me in looking at this plan is that there are buildings with activities that are considered to be of high risk in the event of a flood, and we have to be careful about them in the future. But we have buildings with these uses in this zone right now. So, what does that represent about the way we're going to have to change our thinking?
Yeah, I mean, we are through the overlay, working with just new projects right now and sort of substantial retrofits. So really projects that are 20,000 square feet and up. We want to ensure that the zoning will facilitate those types of updates and upgrades for folks and proponents that want to make those types of improvements over time. So that was another aspect of this, ensuring that our code does not in any way inhibit the types of resilient design measures that can help protect against flooding and flood waters.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. That was, and also taking the time to walk us through this.
Yes, very much appreciated. And we do have a couple of public meetings next week on January 13th from 6 to 8 p.m., as well as a morning session on Friday the 15th from 10 to 12. So we'll just be walking through the components of the overlay, getting into the language, addressing any questions, and taking comments on this through February 12th. So feel free to reach out to Boston Planning Development Agency. Just look for my name, Chris Busch, for more information on any of that.
Well, thank you very much. And that was Chris Busch from the Boston Planning and Development Agency. We'll have more news in just a moment.
Thank you.